Hello, Sayan. Hello.
Yes,
Hello,
yes.
Sayan. Yeah.
Yes, I can hear you. Yeah.
Yeah, you there? Yeah, fine, fine.
Yes.
So take your time and you let me know once you're ready. We will go.
Yes, I am ready. No problem.
And it
We
is
can begin.
streaming live on YouTube. Hello, yes, tell me.
Yes, I am ready. I mean, if you are ready, we can go ahead.
Sayan, we shall start at 12:30.
Okay.
ನನಗ
ಯಾವ್ದೋ ಒಳ್ಳೆ ಏನೋ ವಿಷಯ ಮಾಡಿ
Okay, sir. Shall we start?
Sure, let's go ahead. No problem. Yes, we can. Dr.
Yeah,
Faiz. No problem.
yeah. I'm muting all. Okay. Thank you, sir, once again for honoring my request, and then welcome you once again on this virtual classroom. Of course, you are not a unknown person. You are a known person. Fine, and I welcome you on behalf of our Vice Chancellor, Sir Professor Ramchandra Gowda, sir, and then our Registrar Basavaraj Padmasali, sir, my Chairman, Professor Vijay Naganno, sir, Director, our Director of PG Center, Dayanand Soka, sir, my colleagues, Pooja Handal, Dr. Nagratna Parande, and then Dr. Kavita Kuzgal, Dr. Madhushri Kallimani, and then my PG students, my research scholars, and other dignitaries which are online and on YouTube as well. And then I leave this classroom open to you. Please go ahead. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much once again, Dr. Faiz, for this warm invitation. It's always a pleasure to be a part of your lecture room, actually. I mean, the first experience I had a few weeks back was quite fascinating, so it didn't take much time for me to say a yes for this as well. At the very outset, I wish to extend my sincere gratitude and humble thankfulness to Honorable Vice Chancellor, sir, to respected Registrar, sir, Director, sir, Chairman, sir, all the very respected colleagues, very dear students, research students, PG students, and whoever, all the other professors and colleagues who have joined us for this session today. What I'm going to do is, as it is already mentioned in the poster about what I'm going to speak about, I have just made a couple of additions. And they're not basically additions, but I just felt to make my topic more clear. So what I did is I added the word history up there. And what I'm going to speak about is history and myth in contemporary Indian English fiction. And I'm going to speak about that because history and myth, they are not very separable entities. I mean, whenever we talk about history, the element of myth comes to the forefront, and vice versa. So I thought of adding, I mean, it would be a kind of injustice or a kind of incomplete reflection if I just talk about myth and I don't touch upon history. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to yeah, so this is basically my lecture plan, what I have in front. So I'm going to divide my lecture into three parts. First of all, I'm going to talk about the relationship between history and myth. The second part I'm going to talk about, because my point is also reflection on the Indian fiction. So I'm going to talk about very briefly upon two very contemporary fictional writers who are basically, right, you know, quite famous for their popular fiction, Devdutt Pattanayak and Amish Tripathi. And because we are engaging this lecture within a space of a research methodology workshop, so that's why what I'm going to talk about is that what are the possible research methodologies of understanding myths and history in a de-hierarchical and indigenous pattern. So to begin with my first part, what I'm going to talk about is to look into the origin of the word history. And if we just go to the very basics, we see that the term history originated from the Greek term historia. And I just quote unquote what it means. And it means that inquiry, a kind of inquiry, the art of seeking knowledge, as well as the knowledge that results out from inquiry. And there are several philosophers from then that who have understood or analyzed history, the notion or the phenomena or the discipline of history from various dimensions. And again, if you look into the second point, we see that Joseph and Janda in their handbook talks about history, that is knowledge acquired by investigation. Now, this process of investigation is very interesting. So when usually we encounter the term investigation, the first few things that comes in our mind are that we try to engage in a very holistic, a very inclusive space. So if you have to investigate something, anything, I mean, in our life, if I have to, for example, I lost 10 rupees from my pocket. It fell somewhere around the road, and I don't know where it falls. So if I have to investigate and find out where is that 10 rupees gone, so I have to look into various dimensions, various perspectives, different forms of analytical components I have to take into account in order to understand the problem, or in order to try to find out a solution. So investigation is actually, in general, is a very holistic and inclusive process. But the problem is, if we look at the dictionary meaning of the term history, the problem is the term history is mostly focus on the notion of noun. So history is defined, is perceived mostly as a noun. So all the events that happened in the past, or maybe the past events connected with the development of a particular place of subject, or maybe a written or spoken account of real past events, and some others which I have put as quotations, and you find it in this very slide. Now, the problem of understanding history as a noun is, what happens is, when we look at history as a noun, the problem comes up in its interpretation, in its understanding, re-understanding, and re-investigations in the contemporary era. Now, for instance, when we do something as a noun, it becomes objectified and frozen in the past. So when I look at history as a noun, it just gets objectified and frozen in the past, in a very unchanging and static environment. And that actually has an impact not only in case of academic disciplines, but it actually expands it frozen, static environment within different aspects of our existence. For example, families, communities, then you find societies, libraries, political organizations, classrooms, and each and every aspect, because history is a part of our existence. It's not just a discipline to be, munched and chewed away, but it's a part and our experience of existence. But what happens when we perceive history just as a noun, or we go ahead with the dictionary connotation, it remains frozen and static in the past. So as a result, once it gets frozen and static in the past, what happens is it kind of manufactures various compartments of ideological binaries and hierarchies. So today we have debates like true history, false history. We have debates like good history, bad history. We have debates like relevant history, irrelevant history, sensible history, insensible history, etc. But if we look into if we look into this wider connotation, if we look into this wider denotation, what we really see is these notions of these compartments like true history, false history, good history, bad history, etc. They actually make an effort to generate new narratives of hierarchical powers. And that has been causing a lot of problem to us. And this is why, to date, we see these kind of hierarchies exist based on religious groups, based on communities, based on castes, based on class, based on various other dimensions. So now this process of dissemination, of universalized, hierarchized, and a very staticized, specific narratives of so-called quote unquote as authentic history, and certain historical narratives, they are projected as in a very dehumanized, in a very inferiorized, in a very ignorant manner. Now those historical narratives often, which are connotated as pseudo-historical traditions, those definite historical narratives actually are often associated with myths. So today in the modern world, in the common parlance, we often find that this notion of myth is being denoted as something false, something to be rejected, something to be dehumanizing. So we often say in our common parlance, oh, don't believe in that, it's just a myth, keep it away. So you see how this notion of myth has been reduced to a very lower segregating extent, and this notion of history has been put forward as something authenticated, something which is very, something like a grand narrative, an unquestionable grand narrative, which actually has to be believed as it comes to the forefront. Now, coming to the next point, what I'm going to say is, historically, I'm going to trace, or I'm going to argue that how history and myths have been inseparable entities for a long time. And as we look into this origin of the history and myth, if we look at the concepts of mythos, that is the term myth originating from the term mythos and the logos, what we see is during the Herodotean age, ancient historians made use of the varied forms of oral traditions to fill the missing gaps in their historical construction. And we also know those who are engaged, or myth and history is something we inherit from our parents, our grandparents, our great-grandparents. Almost all of us are brought up by listening to those mythical and historical stories that are narrated at the time of our sleep by our parents and grandparents. So we are more or less habituated with the notion of history and myth. And we see that oral traditions play a very, very crucial role in case of understanding histories. And oral traditions are also an integral part of myth. So in a way, from an oral traditional perspective, we see one interesting thing, that is that history and myth have always been inseparable entities in terms of practices. Now, some instances from the Greek world, you will see that a historian and an army general heavily dependent on the oral traditions to write the history of the Peloponnesian War. And this history of the Peloponnesian War is quite a famous book for the historians, for the sociologists, for the culturists, for the archaeologists, and several others who are specifically interested in the history of ancient Greece. So you see this, an Athenian historian, he also widely dependent on the oral narratives to know about his historical dimensions. Similarly, William Prentice, in his very interesting article, How Thucydides Wrote His History, it was published in 1930, he makes a very important note, and he said that before Thucydides started writing the book, what he did was, he took notes and collected information from the very beginning and during the course of the war. So you see, again, a strong dependence on the oral narratives. Therefore, before history became an academic discipline, before history was disciplined as an academic space, it has its knowledge construction, it drew its knowledge construction from broad subject matters: geography, politics, ethnology, anthropology, sociology, psychology, mythology, obviously, and many more. So this is why it can be argued from this dimension of at least oral narratives that myth and history are very much complementary to each other. Myth and history are a part of the same family. Yes, they might have various points of agreements, various points of convergences, divergences, but we can't deny, or we can't generate that hierarchy, that history as something authentic and myths as something dehumanizing and inauthentic. Now, to carry forward this discussion, what I've seen is here the basic, to go further to the roots, what we see is that any form of historical narrative in ancient Greece, quite interestingly, was referred to as mythos. So as we said earlier, as we saw earlier, that mythos originated, so the word myth originated from the Greek word mythos, and any form of historical narrative as ancient Greece were referred to as mythos. And what is the basic meaning of mythos? Any form of utterance, right? A set of words, sayings, accounts, stories, oral, written, each of these utterances are a part of the mythos. But what happened is, the problem again, if we look into this perspective of the definition, and once again we go to the Oxford Dictionary, because why I'm referring consistently to this particular Oxford Dictionary, because usually when we as kids we try to locate the meaning, obviously we are introduced to the dictionaries first, where we turn the pages and try to see how to find a meaning. So again, If we see the meaning of mythos or myth in the Oxford Dictionary, it has been falsely convicted and generalized as untrue. So Oxford Dictionary stereotypically defines myth, and I quote unquote here, a purely fictitious narrative usually involves supernatural persons, actions, or events, and embodying some popular idea concerning natural or historical phenomena, which is absolutely problematic. And with little bit of historical background now that we have, we can understand that how such a kind of definition is very stereotypical, is very Euro-Western centric, once introduced by the colonizers, spread across the world, and that has what has been fed to us, and we are still eating on it, munching on it, which is actually very problematic. But now again the question arises, now having said that ancient Greece acknowledged this diversity of history and myth, ancient Greek acknowledged the point that history and myth are related to each other. Then since when did this notion that history is something authentic and myth is inauthentic came into existence? Well, again, for that, we have to see what happened at the time of Sophist and later on Plato. So what Plato did is he denounced the notion or denigrated the notion of mythos into mythoi. Now mythoi, what did Plato define mythoi as? A false on the whole, but still having some truth in it. Now this idea of myth as a false narrative, what happened is it played a very prominent role, or it enabled actually later on the European colonizers to use a weapon, to use it as a weapon to prove, to show, to systematize across the world that you see our myths and histories are always superior. Our myths and histories are always grand narratives. They are the parameters of greatness. They are the parameters of authenticity. And what the rest of the world believes in, what the rest of the world has in its stock, what the rest of the world has been believing till date are all inauthentic. So you see, and this is what actually Santos, one of the very famous Portuguese lawyers, historian, and a historian, he points it as this is how myth and history, by creating this binary, this hierarchical structure between myth and history, cognitive injustice was created, how our minds were polluted in that manner. And a very important quote from William McNeill, who in this part talks about myth history in this very interesting article, Myth, Truth, Myth, History and Historians. He talks about that our common parlance reckons myth to be false while history aspires to be true. And that's what I just pointed out at the beginning, that often we say, oh, this is a myth, don't believe in it. Accordingly, a historian who rejects someone else's conclusions calls them mythical, while claiming that his own views are true. But what seems true to one historian obviously will seem false to another, and so one historian's truth becomes another's myth. And in a way, such a kind of, a narrow-minded attitude or narrow-minded, stereotypical, claustrophobic approach leads to the problem that we fail to acknowledge each other historical and mythical differences. Because from our very young childhood days, we are fed with some stock histories, stock myths, stock cultures and traditions. We eat, we munch, we digest, and we actually embed that within our psyche in such a systematized pattern that when new thoughts, new historical dimensions, new perspectives come to the forefront, we fail to acknowledge the difference. We somewhere consciously or unconsciously trap ourselves within a compartment of either truthfulness or non-truthfulness. Now, with respect to this was just the background. With respect to this, what I do is I come to the second part of my lecture. And second part of this particular lecture is now having this conflict, what is true, what is false, what is history, what is myth, what is right, what is wrong, how do they complement with each other, how do they complement each other, how do they diverge from each other, having said these elements at the at the beginning, let us look into the two works. And I have taken these two works also for a specific reason. Let me outline that as well. I have taken these two works specifically because it's very popular, and most importantly, Devdutt Pattanaik and with his one of his famous works, My Gita, and Amish Tripathi with his Sita series and Ramchandra trilogy and the Sita trilogy, they have been revisiting, twisting, curving, expanding, contracting the existing grand mythological narratives of Hindu culture in India. So they have been doing it for a long time, and that process has invited a lot of problems. That process have invited a lot of controversies as well. Now, first of all, let me justify, or let me clarify rather at the very outset, that what I'm going to speak is, I'm not going to take a stand. Okay, I'm not taking a stand what is right, what is wrong, because I have been criticizing from the beginning against, I've been talking against this taking stands of what is right, what is wrong, what is good, what is bad. Because what we need to do is, in order to understand history and myth as a methodology of research, in order to inherit history and myth as a methodology of understanding or conducting a research, we need to be as de-hierarchical, as accommodative, as inclusive as possible. So the first thing we need to keep in mind is not taking a stand, or to avoid taking a stand. So what I'm going to show you here is the first thing, and I have given two links. Okay, one with, you will find with Devdutt Pattanaik's work. Here is a YouTube link. The other slide you will find there is a YouTube link with Amish Tripathi's work as well. So in Devdutt Pattanaik's work, one of his famous work, I mean, whoever we read Devdutt Pattanaik, or we are kind of accustomed or familiar with his works, one of his famous works is My Gita. And now, before I go to that, there is a very important point that I have put up here. That is, now what we have to see is now not taking a stand. How to not take a stand? To not take a stand is to understand that genuine narratives of truth, history, and myth can be both fabrications as well as genuine narratives. It can be historical as well as a historical in nature. So as a researcher, if we should invade, we should investigate with this mindset at the background. And that, I think, to a vast extent, if not completely, will enable us to remain away from the trap of falling into one specific component. Now, coming to the point of Devdutt Pattanaik's work, you will, what has happened is, now it's good. It's now every dimension has a positive and negative element. Now, it's good that we revisit our myths, we revisit our histories, we understand them in our own way, we interpret them in our own way. But when we are understanding, when we are interpreting or reinvestigating the existing grand narratives, what is important for us also to ensure that the existing narratives must be thoroughly read. The existing narratives must be thoroughly understood. Now, what do I mean by thorough understanding? That in which social, cultural, historical, economic, and literary context it was written. Until and unless we understand these flavors, until and unless we understand this, epistemic flavors, what will happen is, when we will go into an interpretation without understanding, without thorough understanding and reading of the already existing narratives, now whether we accept, whether we criticize, that's totally upon us. But to avoid, half-baked research, to avoid half-baked interpretations, it is important for us to go back and understand the context as holistically as possible. Now, with Devdutt Pattanaik's work, which in fact I am talking about that particular work, that is My Gita, which Devdutt Pattanaik even claims, if you have that book, you can just open right away and you can see how Rupa Publications defines the work, that it is not a work of fiction, it's a work of mythical truth. Now, having said that, as a person, as an individual, how will I interpret that? How will I understand that? It means It's very simple. It means that the existing mythological historical stories that we have, what he has done is he have read that, he have analyzed that, he have interpreted that, and maybe keeping those historical, social, cultural, mythical contexts specifically at the background, he is attempting a reinterpretation. But very unfortunately, if you read through the entire book, there is a problem. The problem is, once you finish reading the book, and if you are familiar with Gita, or if you are familiar with the Bhagavad Gita, if you have read that in an English translation, if you're familiar with its shlokas, the problem that you will see is it's a kind of half-baked research. And for that one single reason, I have given a few examples to justify my argument. And if you want more examples, more perspectives, visit that link, YouTube link, right away, and you can find a page-to-page detailed analysis. Now, first, just one excerpt I have taken from that particular analysis, page 106, 10th edition, My Gita, Devdutt Pattanayak says, a similar story is found in Bhagavata Puran, where Krishna, while tending his cows, comes upon a few yajamanas performing yajna and asks them for food. They ignore him. So he goes to their wives, and the yajna patnis feed him all the offerings they have prepared for yajna. The yajamanas are furious, but then realize that their wives look content while they feel angry and frustrated. Now, this is interpretation. Now, again, I'm telling you, the problem arose because Devdutt Pattanayak claimed that his My Gita is his interpretation of mythical truth. If he would have said that, okay, this is a fictional creation, no problem would have come. As fiction writers, we can have our own imagination, we can have our own creations. But once you claim as something as mythical truth, immediately and very obviously, we have to revisit what is there in the background. And we have to compare and critique and see that on what basis these claims have been made. What are the mythical bases? What are those other forms of basis? Now here, the first mistake, a few yajamanas. Now, who are yajamanas? If you can roughly translate, again, the process of translation is very political, very problematic. So I am using this phrase, roughly translate. So a few yajamanas, yajamanas can be roughly translated as sponsors of the sponsors who sponsors the yajnas and who gives permission to the Brahmins to perform the yajnas. Now, first of all, if you visit the original version of the Bhagavata Puran, you will see that there are no yajamanas at all. There are Brahmins. Now, claiming it as a truthful mythical narratives, on what basis it is a truth? When yajamanas didn't exist at all in the original version, how does yajamanas, appearance of yajamanas in Devdutt Pattanayak's My Gita becomes a truth? Point number 2. Krishna comes across yajamanas while tending the cows and asks them for food. So obviously, if yajamanas never existed, Krishna never comes across yajamanas. Again, apart from that, there is a problem. In Bhagavata, it is mentioned that Krishna is relaxing in the banks of the river Yamuna, and he sent his cowherd boys to the Brahmins with a message. Again, another factual wrong. The yajamanas ignore Krishna. Again, if Krishna never went there, if yajamanas never existed, so obviously the question of being ignored by either the yajamanas or the Brahmins doesn't come to the forefront. According to Bhagavata, the cowherd boys went there and they were ignored the Brahmins. So they were ignored by the Brahmins. Mistake number 4, Krishna goes to the wives of the yajamanas who feed them. But Bhagavata says that the wives of the Brahmins come to Krishna with food. Sorry, I have written this. This is a typo error. I have written good, but it should be food. G should be replaced by F. I'm sorry for that. Brahmins come to Krishna with food. Krishna sends them back, and then he feeds the cowherd boys first before he eats. The last one, a major issue. That is, Yajamanas are furious and frustrated. But if you read the Bhagavata Purana, it is exactly opposite. Bhagavata Purana reveals that Brahmins realize their mistakes when they look at their wife, that their wife has served Krishna. They feel, they express their repentance, they feel sorry, and they apologize to Lord Krishna. So these few examples shows that yes, what could be some of the challenges, what could be some of the problems when we create such kind of hierarchies. On the other hand, when we try to bridge these hierarchies of histories and myths, what are some of those particular problems that comes to the forefront? Now, bridging the hierarchies actually can create these kind of gaps. Bridging the hierarchies doesn't mean that we will have to rush and end up into a half-baked research. Because even if we have to bridge something, we have to criticize something, we have to counter resist against something, what is important for us to revisit the existing documents, revisit the existing narratives. And based on that, it is important for us to interpret, reinvestigate, question, or interrogate, or whatever we indulge in. But if we are not doing that, what ends up is a fictional narrative under the veil of mythical truth. Now, coming to the second part. In the second part, what happened? In case of Amish Tripaঠি's, if you look into the Ramchandra series or the Sita series, you find the same thing. But the point with Amish Tripathi is, at the very outset, Amish Tripathi makes his point very clear. Amish Tripathi says that what I have written is a fictional narrative. Now, when you are writing a fictional narrative, it's fine. You can create and invent your own stories with the existing mythical characters. But here, Amish Tripathi's work briefly landed into a translation controversy, and which actually Amish Tripathi admits that it was a failure on his side to indulge into a wrong translation. And I don't know how many of you are familiar with Rajiv Malhotra. He is actually, the founder of the Infinity Foundation, but most importantly, he is known for his works on Hindu phobia, Hindu centrism, Hindutva, etc. So on the Hindu Vedas, Puranas, and the Hindu cultures and traditions. And obviously, I mean, his works are also, opens up to a lot of controversies and all. But this particular one point I found quite relevant from his particular lecture, which is there, or his particular interaction with Amish Tripathi, which you find in this YouTube link. He said that this translation, against this, actually writes us back to the question of understanding the context of interpretation for anything that we do. Translating the words Itihasa and Purana as mythology is completely incorrect. Why? Because the terms Itihas and Purana has to be strictly interpreted according to the Vedas, and because these words originate in the Vedas and the Puranas. And also one more thing, there is a prescribed, once we see words emerging in a particular text, to interpret it, to translate it, or even to transliterate it, it is important for us to keep in mind that these particular words have been shaped, formulated within a particular context, within a prescribed framework, within a prescribed lens. And mythology can be interpreted from Western scholars many ways, like Marxism, Christianity, postmodernism, feminism, human rights, etc. So there are various dimensions. So this particular work actually invited a lot of problem, or in a way a controversy with respect to the translation. So now my reason behind bringing these particular points to the forefront is because that when we are indulging in a process of merging history and myth, when we are indulging in a process, in an exercise of breaking the binaries of history and myth and amalgamating them with each other, when we are doing that, we must always keep in mind that we understand the origin of the existing histories and myths first of all. The origin of the existing histories and myths are very important. Otherwise, what will happen is such kind of problems come to the forefront. Such kind of barriers come to the forefront, where ultimately the process of questioning become a humorous, a kind of mockery of our existing narratives. Now, with these arguments at the backdrop, I'll come to my final part of the lecture, and then I think we will have a uh, very wide space for discussion and questions, reflections, arguments, disagreements as well, which I'm very happy for that. If somebody outrightly disagrees with me and come up with other perspectives, I'm very, very happy to hear that. So please do that. Okay. So now coming to the final part of my presentation, my lecture. As a researcher, because I mean, being a faculty, first of all, makes me a student, a researcher, a scholar, and then a teacher. So I learn and then I share. That is how I like to engage with. So first thing that we need to do is defreezing history and myths. The first, we have to understand that history, we have to change the analytical grammar of the term history. So history, from being a noun, we have to understand that history is a verb. Now, what is a verb? As a part of speech, we are consistently working, acting. So history, if we have to defreeze history, if we have to understand history as a wide, in a multi-dimensional space, if we have to understand history in a multi-dimensional manner, what is important? We have to change the grammar of understanding history. That is, history from being a frozen noun into an active verb. That is first important. History is ever changing. History is transformative. Most importantly, understanding one historical incident, we have the authority, we have the right, we have the eligibility to analyze it from multiple dimensions. That is very important. To imbibe history and myth as a methodology of conducting a research, this particular perspective is extremely important for us. That is, understanding one incident from multiple dimensions. And that understanding should keep on evolving. It should not stop or gets frozen within a particular dimension of time and space. Second is, obviously, if you're able to defreeze history, automatically those grand universal narratives will gradually get converted into pluriversal narratives. So that is why often we find, often we find that when an established religious or an imperial or a historical figure is being criticized, we see that most of the people disagree with it, and then it turns up into personal bashings, communal riots, religious conflicts, etc., etc. Now, why does this happen? Yes, there are obviously, it happens for some genuine reasons of deliberate misinterpretation as well. But on the other side, on various occasions, you will find, because we are so much fed, we are so much impregnated with those existing unquestionable grand narratives, that when we have those tangential narratives coming to the forefront, we fail to accommodate in a critical manner. Rather, what we do is, because we don't have sufficient documentations, sufficient proofs to counter that, we end up into a personal mishmash, a personal bash, hitting each other, killing each other, abusing each other, etc. And we see this, how it is happening. Second is, the third part is de-imperialization of histories and myths. Now, when we worship the grand narratives, when we worship the very grand narratives in an unquestionable manner, we don't want to question them. We accept what is there in front of us. In that process, basically what happens is, we kind of imperialize, we kind of create an empire of grand narratives. An empire with closed doors, with a few, gatekeepers, with a few gatekeepers from a certain section of the society who maintains those grand narratives and doesn't allow any other tangential narrative to invade. So first we have a grand narrative empire. We have some strong gatekeepers who are the voices of those grand narratives, and they make sure through their sheer power, through their sheer maintenance of hierarchies, that no other narratives get a chance to float around and create a buzz. So de-imperialization, this form of maintaining a grand empire, also is, now who are those gatekeepers? Those typical gatekeepers are the bourgeoisie. Now, what I mean by this term bourgeoisie, again, let me tell you, it is not in the economic sense, not in the Marxian sense of the
Hello. Sayan. Hello. Sayan.
Yes, I'm here.
Yeah.
Okay, so should I continue?
Yeah, please, because I think you had muted yourself.
Oh, okay, yeah, right. So that's great. So as I was saying you, that now this, what I'm talking about, the bourgeoisie is the intellectual bourgeoisie who have been playing a pivotal role to, supply narratives to this, to feed this grand narrative empire, make it fatter, more and more it is getting fat, and they then stand as the gatekeepers, and then they tell out to the world, you see, this is what is authentic history all about, and any other narratives that are coming into the play are not at all authentic histories. They should be denounced and rejected as myths. So what we need is, we need to break away from this bourgeoisification, this intellectual bourgeoisification as well. And coming to the very last point, all these together, I mean, all these very components also enable, in a way, these kind of maintenance of grand narratives. We see that within these grand narratives, certain class, certain caste, certain communities, certain religious principles gets a space, and rest all remains muted. So it is a form of racism as well. Racism, obviously, I mean beyond color, where racism comes through geographical hierarchies, cultural hierarchies, political hierarchies, economic hierarchies, and several other dimensions. So this deracialization of histories and myths are also very important for us. And now the point is, why I have included with these particular elements as a part of methodology, because it is very important for us to remember one thing, that we need to imbibe it, we need to project it as a part of practice. Whenever we engage with our respective components, whenever we engage with our understanding of histories and myths, because whatever is our research topic, whichever field we are working upon, no matter whichever field, whatever is our research topic, the important point, we all come from specific backgrounds of histories and myths. We all bear that lineage of typical, specific, individual, indigenous histories and myths. And in our regular research activities, research engagements, research thinking, we need to realize, we need to acknowledge, and we need to apply that as much as possible. Thank you so much, and thank you so much for your patience to listening to me.
Thank you, Sayan. The purpose for giving you this topic was that mythology is now emerging, and most of the trend bestsellers have been inclined towards mythology. And since you are editing one book on this topic, so I thought that this is a befitting topic to deal with. And it also throws some insights for the upcoming research scholars to explore this area. And then these writers have recently fallen in love with Indian mythology, and they are revisiting Indian history and Indian mythology. And especially when it comes to women, feminists, those who are very much interested in feminism, they can think about this very seriously, because Devaki and then Kunti and then Sita, all these women characters are being revisited and reframed, recreated, reincarnated. So so I thought that you are the right person for this topic, and then I thank you for and it was a illuminating lecture. On behalf
Thank you
of
so much.
my Vice Chancellor Ramchandra Goda sir and Registrar Basavaraj Padmasali sir, my Chairman Professor Nagarnav sir, my PG students, my colleagues and my research scholars, I extend thanks to you.
Thank you
Thanks to
so
you.
much.
And then this session is open for discussion. If you have any queries, please go ahead. Yes. Yeah, Saikat Banerjee sir has raised his hand. Yes, please go ahead, sir.
Yeah, Dr. Sayan, first of all, I would like to really thank you for such an insightful, information and insightful reading of Devdutt Patnaik's My Gita, which I also happen to have read. And Devdutt Patnaik's representation of Indian myth is something which I have read, and it's a kind of a there has been controversies, as you have rightly put out. Dr. Sayan, can you listen to me? Am I audible?
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Please.
Yeah. I know you started your lecture by stating the fact that I will not say what is right or what is wrong. I don't want to go into that field. But I'm still inquisitive. I'm still inquisitive because at one hand, as Dr. Fayaz has mentioned, that at one hand, these writers, be it Amish, be it Devdutt Patnaik, be it some other writers, they are reinterpreting the myth, some in fictional terms, some are claiming to be reinterpreting it in their own way. At one hand, they are giving, you can say, a kind of publicity or a kind of popularity among our youth. They are creating a popularity of Indian myths among youth in especially our country. I am very inquisitive to ask if you are okay with it, because your presentation is something which has given me new directions. I have not ventured into this, and today is the first time I was listening, and I'm really influenced what you were speaking. So if you permit, can you just share, if you permit me, can you just share your opinion? Like, I don't want you to go into any controversies, but what I mean is, how do you take Devdutt Patnaik's representation of myth? Like, of course, there are areas which are controversial. So what's your take on it? Like, how do you approach Devdutt Patnaik as a writer in terms of representation of myth?
Yes, I mean, thank you so much, Dr. Shoykot Banerjee, for this very interesting question. I would like to tell you that, as I was mentioning from the very beginning, that the way history and myth, these two notions have been misinterpreted from various dimensions from the ancient times. Mostly it figured out in Europe. The point is, it is obviously very important having this understanding at the background that history and myth can complement and amalgamate with each other at various points, it is important for us to revisit. It's very important for us. And this process of revisiting is most welcome. Now, my question is, widely, I can revisit widely from two dimensions. I mean, there are various dimensions I can revisit, but widely from two dimensions. One is this revisiting can be fictional revisiting, that I read those ancient texts and then I imagine that, okay, in the 21st century, if Sita would have existed, she would have acted like this. Okay, if in the 21st century, Dhritarashtra would have existed, he would have acted like this. That is one way of revisiting. That is also perfectly fine. Second way of revisiting is, I claim that after reading those texts, that whatever that is written, or whatever the way the text has been interpreted, or those shlokas have been translated, it is wrong. The right translation is this. Now, the point with Amish Tripathi's work is perfectly fine. Why? Because at the very outset, he says that it's a fiction work. Obviously, he has problems with translation things, and which I think rightly Rajiv Malhotra pointed out. Those are obviously technical mistakes, minor mistakes, which can be rectified. But claiming the wide thing of the stories, the narratives, the themes, and the plots, at the very outset, he makes it clear it's fiction. That's fine. So we are reading with a fictional mindset. But the problem with Devdutt Pattanaik is, as you have already said, and you have read his book, My Gita, and if you see the blurb of the book as well, what is written, he claims that it's a truthful mythical narrative. Now, when you say it's a truthful mythical narrative, obviously, on what basis you change the characters? On what basis you change the story? Now, if something is written in the Sanskrit shloka that gets translated into as the, if I just give me the chance of revisiting that particular slide. So if I just take this particular slide into consideration, that you see, if in the original Bhagavata Purana, there are no Brahmins, how does, I mean, there are Brahmins, there are no Yajamanas, how does Yajamanas appear? Now, can Devdutt Pattanaik claim and say that the Yajamanas who existed are translated as Brahmins? It cannot be, it's factually wrong. Now, when I am claiming a truth, I am claiming a factual truth. At that time, it's factually wrong. The story goes, if you look at the other mistakes, the story goes factually wrong. So what the problem is, such kind of claims that I am writing a mythical truth, this is my Gita. Now today, if I start writing my Mahabharata or my Ramayana, I just can't invent anything and everything and say that this is the truth. But that will just end up into half-baked research. For a truthful mythical interpretation, what we need is, we need to keep the facts correct. We need to have, now by keeping the facts correct, we can revisit the facts and reinterpret them. So for me, that is why Devdutt Pattanaik work, and specifically this particular work of My Gita, is actually very problematic in that way. So if Devdutt Pattanaik is interpreting myth from this dimension, then we are back to square one. We are not doing anything new, only we are worsening the situation. We are only increasing the gaps. History is laughing out loud at myths, at us. We are not questioning anything. We are not able to de-bourgeoisify or de-racialize or de-imperialize anything. We are just falling into the same trap in a different way.
So don't you think that because if you see Devdutt Pattanaik's literary output, he is producing at least, I think, 15 to 20 books per year. And most of his topics are on this myth and all. So the way, as you have pointed out, the way he is misrepresenting myth to the youth, don't you think that, this is something which has to be taken to a higher level?
Yeah, but if it is being misinterpreted, then why it is that they are becoming bestsellers?
That is the point. I mean, I think Dr. Banerjee's and Dr. Fayaz Ilkal's question actually kind of complements each other. It's very important. In fact, this is the question. The point is, popular fiction, that is something appearing a warning to us, because what is happening is we find that reading Devdutt Pattanayak is also becoming a status quo. You will see a lot of parents boasting that their children are reading Devdutt Pattanayak right now. I mean, you are reading Ramayana, Mahabharata, fat books of Ramayana, Mahabharata, people will have a laugh at you. Oh, you are so ancient, you are so old. But you are reading Devdutt Pattanayak, you're reinterpreting, you're understanding. So that is the problem we are having. So we will,
Reinterpreting or misinterpreting, sir?
absolutely. I mean, re-bracket misinterpreting, absolutely. So
So
we are
maybe
misinterpreting,
in modern times, yeah, reframe.
absolutely.
Yeah,
So
as per the needs of the present society. And they are serving the
yes,
society.
yes, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, we are having such problems. So I mean, so this is actually alarming, and we need to be aware of it. So this is why it is important for these fictional writers, because they are becoming the face of the social mainframe. They are becoming the main face of it, and they are, as being popular writers, they are not just read by people in India. They are read by people all across the world. So obviously, reading a 150-page book is easier than reading a 1,000-page manuscript. So it is important for these writers to be careful, to be cautious about these elements. That what they are saying is being read by thousands and lakhs of readers across the world. Their books sell like hotcakes. You don't find a Bhagavad Gita and a Ramayana in a airport bookshop, but you will find all across the bookstalls. You will find there is Amish Tripathi and there is Devdutt Pattanayak. So if Devdutt Pattanayak is doing it wrong, he need to realize that. But unfortunately, I mean, there is
Means
no
we have become
pause
very
on it.
rational. When it comes the same to minority writers, especially from Muslim writers, they are not taken positively.
Absolutely.
In fact, fatwa has
Absolutely.
been put on them, taslima, naslim, shame, and all those. They can't play with their mythology as well as their religious scriptures.
That's true. That's true.
So where is the fall here? From the
See,
reader's
the point
perspective or
is,
the society's perspective? Of course,
see, the
readers are a part of the
perspective
society.
is, now when we talk about Taslima Nasreen's work, for instance, or we talk about Salman Rushdie's work, for instance, the point is, if you look at their arguments are very logical. Why do I say logical? Because they are not distorting the existing narratives, or they are not distorting the already written narratives without reading them. Their interpretation is, first they have read those elements, they have experienced those elements in their life, and from those experiences they have shared that, you see, what is exactly written may not be categorically interpreted. Taslima Nasreen shares his experience of being a Muslim woman. Salman Rushdie shares his experience of being a Muslim man. How their freedom, their free ways of expressions are being curbed by the particular Islamic social structure. Often it has come to the forefront. But their interpretation, you can't claim that they are half-baked narratives. They have read, they have experienced, they have understood, they have
But
interpreted
they
in their
have been
life.
critical. But they have been critical.
See, being critical is absolutely fine. But
So
when
the
I
same
am
thing we can say about Indian mythology. The these writers who are trying their hand on Indian mythology misinterpret in order to create controversy and become successful.
I mean, that is a marketing stunt then.
Yeah.
That is a kind of marketing stunt. I mean, if I misinterpret and then try to be successful, that is a typical marketing stunt.
Yeah, that is what is going on.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah, it's very unfortunate.
Yes, I mean, in various ways, it's unfortunate. Various ways.
So, Dr. Sayan, you are of the opinion that but in this particular lecture that you are talking about, you are trying to bring forth the difference between misinterpretation and reinterpretation. Am I right?
Yes, in a way, yes, it is.
In a way means, can you just clarify?
Yes, in a way means that when I give the examples of the works of fiction, mythical fiction, and mythical truth, and when I talked about the perspective of Devdutt Patnaik's work, and then with Dr. Fires talking about bringing in the question of Salman Rushdie and Taslima Nasreen. So from these perspectives, we see that there is a massive difference between reinterpretation and misinterpretation. Obviously, there is.
Thank you.
Misinterpretation itself leads to reinterpretation.
Yes, they do, they does, but we need to be careful about this, because that is why, because misinterpretation leads to reinterpretation. That is why we need to be careful about it. At least what I believe from my experience.
It's left to the readers.
Yes.
No, but how misinterpretation leads to reinterpretation? These are completely, I think, two.
Yeah, obviously, when Taslima Nasreen criticizes, when Taslima Nasreen criticizes Wheel, and she calls it as a shame, what she is doing? She is misinterpreting. Since so long, one custom has been established, and she is posing a question.
No, posing a question is not. I think posing a question is not should not be taken as a misinterpretation.
Yeah, but then see, of course, posing a question is a right, but she is not posing a question, but she is misinterpreting it by playing with the existing norms.
So here, Dr. Fayaz, I would just like to interpret. I just like to, just like to put a pause to this, because Sayan being the presenter, I think Sayan is in a better, position to clarify both our questions, because here what you are saying is, Dr. Fayaz is saying that when somebody is interpreting something, it becomes like misinterpretation becomes a reinterpretation, and what I mean to say is, misinterpretation and reinterpretation, or misinterpretation, to be more specific, misinterpretation and interpretation are two different things, in my opinion. Like if you take Devdutt Patnaik is not talking the things that are already taught. So we are taking a text, and in that text, like he has given the example, suppose Sayan authors a book on Mahabharata, and he replaces the characters, or he brings in new characters. That means what? He is giving a completely wrong information. That is what Sayan is giving through his presentation of My Gita by Devdutt Patnaik. And what Taslima Nasreen is saying is, Taslima Nasreen or Salman Rushdie, be it satanic verses, they are interpreting something. They are interpreting a text. They are not giving misinformation. So what I want to clarify from Dr. Sayan is, the debate here is between misinformation and interpretation. Am I clear? So Taslima Nasreen is not giving wrong information. She is reinterpreting something, whereas Devdutt Patnaik is giving wrong information.
Sir, sorry to interrupt you, but what is been reinterpretation for you may be misinterpretation for me, because I belong to that society.
Exactly, sir.
Are you getting it?
Yes,
I think Dr. Sayan is in a better position to answer this question.
I basically
my intention is to have a dialogue, a discussion. That's it.
I basically agree. Kind of, I understand both of the arguments, and which I kind of very much acknowledge that. On the one side, when Dr. Banerjee is pointing out that how misinterpretation can be reinterpretation, and when on the other side Dr. Fires is pointing out that it could be like both of us, once reinterpretation can be someone else's misinterpretation as well. So these both elements are very accommodative, and I totally acknowledge that. I mean, from certain dimensions, both are correct. So what are those? So first of all, when I meant by this misinterpretation and reinterpretation, it is important for us to segregate these two things. But also, the point is, somewhere, somewhat, we are failing to segregate. That is why works of Devdutt Pattanaik like My Gita is becoming a popular fiction. It is becoming a medium of interpretation or of reinterpretation of our existing myths and legends. So this is a problem. We need to segregate, but this segregation is somewhere not taking place. We need to understand the differences between the two. Secondly, talking about someone's reinterpretation and someone's misinterpretation, I totally accommodate these two views because, as Dr. Fayez pointed out, it depends on one's positionality. It depends on one's religious, cultural, political, economic, and most importantly, personal positionality. And talking about both of these works, like Taslima Nasreen's works, or we are talking about Salman Rushdie's satanic verses. Now, for Salman Rushdie's satanic verse, for Salman Rushdie, maybe, obviously, not maybe, in fact, obviously, their positions actually provoked them to interpret the existing verses in that manner. Now, if Dr. Fayez is sitting in his position, he have different set of experiences, he have different set of understanding. So obviously, if that set of understanding doesn't match with those set of understandings that have been experienced or understood by Salman Rushdie or maybe by Taslima Nasreen, that can be a misinterpretation from him. Now, that's perfectly fine. Dr. Fayez's misinterpretation, this notion of misinterpretation can exist at par with Taslima Nasreen's reinterpretation. My problem is when I will start weighing this, which is correct? Dr. Fayez's misinterpretation is correct or Taslima Nasreen's reinterpretation is correct? And when I will identify one against the other, that will be a problem. Why that will be a problem? Because in a way, when I am indulging in such a weighing, in such a hierarchy, I am putting both of them on a weighing machine and trying to judge who is higher and who is lower. In a way, through this exercise, I am trying to subjugate one narrative and I'm trying to marketize and promote the other narrative. My question is, what is wrong if these two narratives exist side by side? Let the conflicts exist, because if these two narratives exist side by side, the advantage for us is we will come up with new dimensions of thinking. Consistently through these conflicts, we will come up with new dimensions. But once I say that, okay, Dr. Fayez's narrative is higher than what Taslima Nasreen has said, or her narrative is authentic and what Dr. Fayez is saying or Dr. Banerjee is saying is a myth, there lies the problem. Because what I'm doing is now I am just shutting down both of you and I'm just projecting and promoting one narrative. And this was basically the core argument of my of my presentation actually.
So let us put this to rest, because again we can I will catch hold of you later and we can have a discussion with even Sayakat as well as you. Okay, if anybody has any clarification, discussion or any query, please go ahead. Yeah, Parande madam, Nagaratna Parande madam has question.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Hello, sir.
Yeah,
Hello, sir.
Yes, ma'am.
The role of religion and politics in history writing, sir. Please explain.
The role of religion and politics in history writing.
It matters a lot.
Yes,
Then
it does matter a lot. I mean,
Then,
I mean, even if not religion, politics already come, because politics is, I mean, talking about religion, religion and politics, once again, they are a part of each other. Now,
yes, sir. Yes.
Politics or politicizing religion, these two things are a part of our existence. Now, I mean, because you have just asked me to comment, I will obviously, give a general. I will like to give you a general perspective, because your question is like a generalized comment. You asked me to comment on it. So the point is, I totally agree with you. Religion and politics is a part of historical writing. If it is a part of historical writing, I don't find there is any problem in it. I mean, it adds more to the diversities. It adds more to our historical and
interpretations, misinterpretations, how these things challenge male dominant narratives of Indian epics. Male
oh yes,
dominant. Huh.
that's a wonderful
I
question.
feel
Yes,
that they are
how these
challenging. Yeah, these things are challenging.
absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, I'll give you another example from this text, which actually again is a also comes as an example of misinterpretation. Now, the point is, if you read again my Gita, there Krishna's gopis, are playing with each other. They're hugging each other. They are cuddling each other. Showing their love towards each other. This basically, this perspective was basically projected by Devdutt Pattanaik as from an LGBTQ perspective. Now, this interpretation is excellent. I mean, bringing in LGBTQ to the myth, but again, this argument did not stay long, because at the outset he did the blunder by saying he's talking about mythical truths, and there is no element of LGBTQ in the original texts. But the point is, talking about this revisiting, reinterpreting, I think there is a tendency, there is an effort on behalf of the various new writers to bring in the gender perspective in a balanced manner rather than from the patriarchal perspective. Apart from this text, I'll give you one small example, madam. There is this famous theater director in West Bengal. His name is Manoj Mitro. He's a very famous theater director and is a very old person. I remember a few, like 5 to 6 years back, when I went to watch one of his plays. In that particular play, Sita is shown that when Sita is in Vanvas and Ramchandra, after several years, comes to take away Sita, Sita denies. Sita says that, you see, I don't want to go with you again because I don't want your protection. I can now take care of myself. I have many friends here. We can take care of each other. I don't need a male person to come and rescue me, to function as a rescuer, to come and rescue me and try to prove your patriarchal domination over me by showing that how much protective that a woman will always need a protection from a man. This particular notion in that particular drama, this particular theater veteran, this particular theater director breaks away. So this is just one small example I'm citing, just in terms of theater. In terms of other ways of writing and reading and interpreting books, we have ample of articles where these female characters in the various myths, histories, and legends that exist, they have been depatriarchized and projected from a dominant feminine perspective. So we can see it's happening. Sometimes it is landing like Devdutt Pattanaik's work, it is landing into half-baked research. But it is happening when we are talking about reinterpretation, re-understanding, these gendered perspectives are obviously coming to the forefront.
Thank you.
Is it fine, madam?
Yeah, I'm convinced.
Okay, so does anyone have any question? Or shall we wind up?
I mean, in case, in
Yes,
fact, I
Rakesh.
mean, I totally
Yeah.
understand.
Yeah, Rakesh, please go ahead. Rakesh.
Hello, sir. Can you listen me?
Yeah,
Can you
please
hear
go
me?
ahead,
Yes, yes.
Rakesh.
Yes, sir.
He is a teaching assistant in my PG center, Sayan.
Okay, wonderful.
Yeah, please go ahead, Rakesh.
Hello, sir. First of all, I'm very much delighted to listen your vibrant and breathtaking lecture. There,
Thank you,
one
Rakesh.
thing is very much specifically clear and highly visible that in order to interpret writers like Tripati, Patnaik, even for that matter, Taslima Nasreen and all, before we decide misinterpretation or reinterpretation, your lecture clearly throws some limelight on that we need to read original mythical text, isn't it? Original resources.
Absolutely.
Because why I am adding this point, whether we are going to misinterpret or reinterpret, like it will not just end just belonging to one particular religion or else having our own set of experience. It does not count.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, one point we always need to keep in mind that if I have to criticize you, Rakesh ji, the
Yes, sir.
simple point is I need to read your work. I agree with you, I disagree with you, that's totally different. That's totally up to me.
Yes.
But if I criticize your work or your stances without even reading your work, what will happen is it will end up into a half-baked interpretation.
Obviously, sir.
That is the basic challenge.
Like why your
So,
overall analysis felt quite interesting means new readers like us, it's a good lesson for us, just reading selling writings, especially for us to back original sources. Much, sir.
my,
Yeah. Fine. Good to hear the lecture from you. Very